The knife was pressed against my back before the ink on the treaty had even dried. I felt it through the fabric of my ceremonial robe, a small cold point just beneath my ribs, and I understood in that instant that the wedding I had agreed to in order to save my people might end with my own blood on the floor of the Grand Hall. My name is Kalis Ven, third daughter of the Thessari Dominion, and I had been told this marriage would end a war that had burned for 50 years. I had not been told that some of my own kind would rather see me dead than see me wed to a human. I did not turn around. Turning around gets you killed faster than standing still. I had learned that much from the war, even if I had never held a weapon myself. Instead, I looked across the hall at the man I had married only minutes before, a human named Ethan Cole, standing tall in his gray dress uniform, his hands folded in front of him like a soldier at rest. He was not looking at me, he was looking past me, at whoever was holding that knife, and something in his expression had gone very still. "Do not move," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear him over the murmur of the crowd. "Let me handle this." I almost laughed. Handle this. He was human. Humans were clever, I had been taught. Clever the way a fox is clever, using tricks and tools to survive against creatures stronger than themselves. But strength itself, real strength, was not something my people believed humans possessed. I had seen the reports. I had read the medical scans. Humans bruised if you gripped their arms too hard. They needed 8 hours of sleep or their minds grew slow. They lived less than 100 years if they were lucky. My own grandmother had lived 400 and still climbed mountains for pleasure. So when the man behind me pressed that knife harder against my back, I expected my new husband to talk, to stall, to call for the guards the way any sensible, fragile human would. Instead, he moved. I did not see how he crossed 6 feet of marble floor so fast. I only felt the knife vanish from my back, heard a short, sharp sound like a branch snapping, and then heard a body hit the ground behind me. When I finally allowed myself to turn, the man who had been ready to kill me on my wedding day was lying on the floor, disarmed, and Ethan was already stepping back into his formal position beside me, straightening his jacket as though nothing at all had happened. The hall had gone silent. Even my own guards, Thessari soldiers twice the size of any human, stood frozen, staring at him. "You should probably know," Ethan said to me, his voice calm, almost gentle, "that I don't intend to let anyone hurt you. Not today, not ever. I know you didn't choose this marriage because you wanted to. But I did." I stared at him, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes had just shown me. This was supposed to be the weak one. This was supposed to be my burden to carry, not my shield. "Who are you?" I asked, and I meant it as a real question, not the polite formality it sounded like. He offered me the smallest of smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Someone who has spent a long time learning how not to look dangerous," he said. "It made the war shorter. It made the peace possible. But it seems today that isn't going to work anymore." Around us, the guards finally moved, dragging the fallen attacker away, murmuring into their communicators, but I barely noticed them. I was still looking at Ethan Cole, my husband of less than an hour, and understanding for the first time that everything I thought I knew about his people might be wrong. The marriage itself had been the Elder Council's idea, born out of desperation rather than romance. 50 years of war between the Thessari Dominion and the human worlds had cost both sides more than either could afford to lose. Our ships were faster. Our numbers were greater. And yet somehow every campaign against the humans ended not in victory, but in stalemate, in losses we could not explain, in commanders returning home quiet and changed, refusing to speak of what they had seen on the front lines. When the ceasefire finally came, both sides needed something more than a signature to hold it in place. The council decided that a marriage between a member of the ruling family and a senior human officer would bind the peace with something more personal than politics. I was chosen because I was the most expendable of the elders' daughters, third in line, useful for exactly this kind of sacrifice and nothing more. I had expected humiliation. I had expected to be given the least important of their soldiers, some quiet, unremarkable man who posed no threat, a symbol rather than a person. When they told me his name was Ethan Cole, a decorated officer with an unremarkable service record, I assumed the humans had done exactly what I would have done in their place, offering up someone forgettable to a marriage they saw as merely useful, not meaningful. Meeting him for the first time, I believed I had been right. He was of average height, average build, with short brown hair and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He wore his uniform well, but he did not carry himself the way our own soldiers did, with the constant readiness of predators. He simply stood and waited and watched, saying very little as the ceremony was explained to both of us by officials from both sides. "You do not have to pretend to want this," I told him privately, before the ceremony began, speaking the human trade language I had spent months learning. "I understand what this marriage is. A cage with two doors, built so neither side can blame the other for opening it." He had looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I understand it the same way," he said. "But I don't think it has to only be that." I had not believed him then. I believed very little of what he said in those first days, assuming, as I had been raised to assume, that human words were tools bent to whatever purpose was needed in the moment. It was only after the incident in the Grand Hall, after I felt the knife lift away from my back and watched a man fall without a mark left behind, that I began to wonder whether I had misunderstood not just my husband, but his entire species. That night, after the guards had questioned the attacker and confirmed he belonged to a faction within my own people called the Ashbourne Circle, a group who believed the treaty was surrender dressed up as peace, I found myself sitting across from Ethan in the quarters we had been given on the treaty colony. Neither of us had spoken much since the ceremony ended. The silence between us was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people trying to decide how much truth the other one could be trusted with. "You moved faster than anything I have ever seen," I said finally. "Faster than our own soldiers, how?" He considered the question for a long moment, turning a small cup of untouched tea in his hands. "Training," he said, "and a few other things I'm not able to explain yet. I hope you understand that isn't me being difficult. There are reasons certain things about my people were never shared during the war, even after the ceasefire. Secrets," I said, and I did not try to hide the bitterness in my voice. "I have given up my home, my name, and my safety for this peace, and you are telling me there are still secrets." "I know it isn't fair," he said, and to my surprise, he sounded like he meant it. "But some secrets exist because sharing them too early makes things worse, not better. I promise you this, Kalis. Whatever I'm not telling you, it was never meant to hurt you. If anything, it exists to keep you safe." I wanted to argue with him, to demand answers the way a daughter of the Dominion was trained to demand things, but something about the steadiness in his voice stopped me. I had spent my whole life around men who postured, who filled silence with boasts about their strength and their bloodlines. Ethan did none of that. He simply told me what he could, admitted what he couldn't, and let the rest sit quietly between us. Over the following days, I began to watch him more closely, not out of affection, but out of the same instinct that had kept my ancestors alive on a violent homeworld long before we ever reached the stars. I noticed how the human soldiers stationed on the treaty colony straightened slightly whenever he walked past, the way soldiers do around someone they respect, rather than merely someone who outranks them. I noticed how careful he was in small things, opening doors before I reached them, learning which foods from my homeworld I could actually digest without becoming ill, remembering details about my family that I had only mentioned once in passing. I also noticed what he never did. He never raised his voice. He never postured. He never once tried to prove himself to me the way I had expected a human soldier to, desperate to seem stronger than he was. If anything, he seemed to be doing the opposite, quietly making himself seem smaller, less important, less dangerous than the man who had ended a threat to my life in less than 2 seconds without leaving a single visible injury behind. One evening, about a week into our marriage, I asked him directly why humanity had fought my people to a standstill for 50 years, despite what our own reports insisted about human physical weakness. He was quiet for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice had a weight to it that I had not heard before. "Fragile people learn to stop being fragile," he said, "or they die. We didn't die." I did not understand what he meant. Not fully, not yet. I assumed it was simply a soldier's way of avoiding a question he didn't want to answer, another polite deflection dressed up as wisdom. It would be some time before I understood that he had told me the plain truth, and that I simply hadn't been ready to hear it. What I did understand, sitting there across from him in the quiet of our shared quarters, was that the marriage I had entered expecting weakness and humiliation had instead placed me beside something I did not yet have the words to describe. Whatever Ethan Cole truly was beneath his calm, careful exterior, it was not what my people had assumed about his kind for 50 years of war. And somewhere out among the stars, I suspected, the Ashbourne Circle who had tried to kill me on my wedding day were about to learn the same lesson, in a far harder way than I had. The attempt on my life during the wedding was only the beginning, though I did not know that yet. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into learning everything I could about the man I had married, partly out of duty, and partly because the mystery of him had become impossible to ignore. I began keeping notes, the way I had been trained to do since childhood, cataloging weaknesses and strengths, the way a strategist studies an enemy, except now I studied a husband instead. I wrote down every small human failing I observed. He needed sleep every night without fail, unlike the Thesari officers who could function for days without rest. A minor injury to his hand from a closing door left a bruise that lasted nearly a week. He could not survive more than a few minutes without air, could not tolerate extreme cold the way my people could not go more than a few days without food before his body began to weaken. I sent these observations home in coded reports to my sister, half expecting her to laugh at how unremarkable my husband truly was beneath the strange incident at the ceremony. Perhaps, I told myself, what happened in the Grand Hall had been luck, or training, or some trick of human technology hidden in his uniform. Perhaps I was building a mystery out of nothing, but then I began noticing the things that did not fit so easily into my careful little list of human weaknesses. There was the afternoon I watched him spar with 2 of his own soldiers during a routine training exercise on the colony grounds. I had assumed I would watch him lose, or at best hold his own weakly against men half his age. Instead, I watched him move the way water moves around stones, never quite where either soldier expected him to be, ending the match in under a minute without either young man landing a single real strike. When I asked him about it afterward, he only shrugged and said that experience counted for more than youth in most fights. There was the evening a supply shuttle suffered a mechanical failure on its landing approach, forcing an emergency crash landing near the colony's outer perimeter. I watched Ethan run toward the wreckage before the emergency alarms had even finished sounding, and I watched him pull 2 crew members free from twisted metal that should have required heavy equipment to move. When I asked him about it the following day, he simply said that adrenaline does strange things to the human body in an emergency, and left it at that. Each explanation he offered was reasonable enough on its own. Training, experience, adrenaline. But together, they began to form a pattern I could not ignore, a pattern that suggested the small, careful, unremarkable man I had married was holding something back from everyone around him, myself included. I began to understand that this was not unique to Ethan. The other human soldiers stationed on the treaty colony carried themselves the same way, quiet and unassuming until a moment of genuine danger arrived, and then suddenly capable of things that should not have been possible for creatures my people considered so fragile. I started to wonder whether the war itself, 50 years of stalemate against a species we outnumbered and supposedly outmatched, made a different kind of sense if humanity had never actually been fighting at their true capability. I raised this thought with Ethan one night, carefully, the way one raises a question they suspect will not be answered honestly. "Your people fought us for 50 years, I said. "Our numbers were greater, our ships were faster, our soldiers were stronger, by every measurement we had. And yet you held the line every single time. I want to understand why." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the window of our quarters, where the lights of the treaty colony glittered against the darkness of space. When he finally answered, his voice had none of its usual careful lightness. "Because we learned a long time ago that showing our full strength to a new species usually ends badly," he said. "Either they panic and attack us out of fear, or they see us as a threat to be eliminated before we grow stronger, so we hold back. We fight just hard enough to survive, just hard enough to hold a line, and never hard enough to reveal what we're actually capable of. It isn't dishonesty, Kalis. It's survival. It's also, I hope, a kind of mercy, giving new neighbors in the galaxy a chance to know us slowly instead of being terrified of us all at once." I did not know what to say to that. It was the closest he had come to confirming everything I had begun to suspect, and yet he had still told me nothing specific, nothing I could take back to my own people as proof of anything at all. "Do the other humans know this?" I asked. "The soldiers here, the officers, do they all hold back the same way?" "Most of them," he said. "It's part of what we're taught from a young age, long before any of us ever put on a uniform. Strength without control isn't something to be proud of, it's something to be careful with." I wanted to press him further, but something in his expression told me I had already reached the edge of what he was willing to share, at least for now. Instead, I asked a different question, one that had been sitting quietly in the back of my mind since the wedding. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" I asked. "You could have refused. Other officers were considered for this role. Why you?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something unguarded pass across his face, something that looked almost like grief. "Because I've seen what happens when peace fails," he said quietly. "I've seen what 50 years of war does to people on both sides. I volunteered for this, Kalis. Nobody assigned me to you. I asked to be considered because I believed, and still believe, that this marriage could actually mean something, not just a piece of paper holding two exhausted sides apart, but something real. I know you didn't have the same choice. I know this wasn't fair to you. But I promise you, whatever else I am, I did not enter this marriage lightly." I did not know how to respond to that kind of honesty. My own people rarely spoke so plainly about their private reasons for anything, especially not to someone they had known only a matter of weeks. I found myself, against every instinct I had been raised with, beginning to believe him. It was 3 weeks after the wedding when the first real crack in the peace appeared, and it came from a direction I should have expected but did not. My own sister, Illyra, arrived at the treaty colony under the pretense of a diplomatic visit, ostensibly to check on my well-being as my closest living relative. I was glad to see her at first, hungry for a familiar face among all the careful, unfamiliar humans I had spent my days with. But within an hour of her arrival, I noticed the way she studied Ethan, the way her questions to him carried an edge that had nothing to do with sisterly concern. "You seem very comfortable here," she said to me privately, once Ethan had excused himself to attend to colony business. "Comfortable with him. He has been kind to me," I said carefully, uncertain how much of my growing suspicions about him I should share, even with my own sister. "Kinder than I expected." Illyra's expression tightened. "The Ashbourne Circle believes this marriage is a mistake," she said. "They believe the Elder Council gave away too much for a peace that serves the humans more than it serves us. There are those who believe the attack at your wedding was justified, Kalis, a warning that should have been heeded rather than punished." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You are telling me my own sister sympathizes with the people who tried to kill me. I am telling you that you are not the only one asking questions about what humanity truly is beneath their calm exteriors," Illyra said. "The Ashbourne Circle believes the humans have been hiding their true strength this entire time, using diplomacy as a mask while they quietly grow more powerful behind it. They believe this marriage was never about peace. They believe it was about giving humanity time and access they would never have gained through war." "That is not true," I said, though even as I said it, I thought of my own notes, my own growing suspicion that Ethan and his people held back far more than they revealed. "Perhaps not," Illyra said, "but perception matters more than truth in times like these, sister. And there are those within our own ranks who intend to act on that perception, treaty or no treaty. I came here to warn you, because whatever you believe about your husband, you are still my sister, and I do not wish to see you caught in the middle of what is coming." I asked her what exactly was coming, but she would not say more, only warning me to be careful, to trust no one completely, not even the man I had married, and to watch the skies around the treaty colony in the days ahead. That night, I told Ethan everything my sister had said, holding nothing back, not out of trust exactly, but out of a growing understanding that whatever storm was approaching, we would need to face it together rather than separately. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular. "The Ashbourne Circle," he said finally. "We've had reports of their activity for months. I didn't want to alarm you before we had confirmation." "More secrets," I said, though this time without the bitterness I had felt before. "This one I can explain," he said. "Our intelligence suggests they've been gathering old war material, ships and weapons decommissioned after the ceasefire, hiding them in unregistered locations across the border systems. We believe they intend to stage an attack designed to look like human aggression, something dramatic enough to shatter the treaty beyond repair. An attack here," I said slowly, "on the treaty colony, on us. It would make sense," he said. "Kill the treaty and the marriage in one move and blame it on us in the process. Reignite the war before either government has a chance to investigate what actually happened." I felt a chill, despite the climate controls humming quietly around us. "When?" "Soon," he said. "I don't know exactly when, but soon." I looked at him. This quiet, careful man I had married under duress, and had slowly, unwillingly, begun to trust, despite everything I had been taught to believe about his kind. "If they come," I said, "what will you do?" He met my eyes, and for the first time since the wedding, I saw something in his expression that was not calm, not careful, not deliberately unremarkable. It was resolve, plain and unshaken. "Whatever I have to," he said. "I told you once that I would keep you safe." That wasn't a polite thing to say at a ceremony, Kalis. I meant it. Whatever comes through that sky, I promise you, it will regret finding us here. I did not fully understand yet what that promise truly meant, what he was capable of when the careful mask finally came off. But lying awake that night, listening to the quiet hum of the colony around us, I found myself hoping, for the first time since this marriage began, that whatever the Ashbourne Circle intended to unleash upon us, it was not prepared for what it would actually find waiting on the other side. My sister left the treaty colony 2 days after her warning, and with her departure came a silence that felt heavier than any argument. I spent those days watching the sky more than I watched anything else, half expecting warships to appear out of the darkness at any moment, half hoping I had simply let fear cloud my judgment. Ethan changed during those days as well, though quietly, in ways only someone paying close attention would notice. He spent longer hours in the colony's command center. He requested additional patrol routes for the small security detachment stationed with us, routes that seemed to cover gaps in our sensor coverage I hadn't even known existed. He began sleeping less, though he never once complained about it, and he never once let his composure slip in front of the colony staff or the handful of Thessari diplomats still stationed with us. I asked him one evening whether he believed we were truly prepared for what might come. "Prepared is a strong word," he said. "Ready might be closer to the truth. There's a difference. Prepared means you know exactly what's coming, and you've built the perfect answer for it. Ready means you've done everything you can, and you trust yourself to handle whatever shows up instead." "And are you ready?" I asked. "I've been ready for a long time," he said, and something in the way he said it made me believe him completely. The attack came 11 days after Alira's warning, on a morning that began like any other, with pale light spilling through the colony's viewports and the quiet hum of daily routine settling over the residential quarters. I remember the exact moment everything changed, because I was standing in the kitchen area of our quarters, holding a cup of the strange, bitter human drink Ethan had introduced me to, when the alarms began. They were not the gentle chimes used for routine drills. These were sharp, insistent, the kind of sound designed to cut through sleep and distraction alike, warning of genuine danger rather than practiced procedure. Ethan was on his feet before the second alarm cycle finished, already moving toward the door, his calm demeanor replaced by something focused and immediate. "Stay close to me," he said, not as a request but as an instruction, the kind of voice I imagine he used with soldiers under his command during the war. "Whatever happens, do not run off on your own. Do you understand?" I nodded, my heart pounding in a way it rarely did, even in the tense political meetings I had grown up navigating my entire life. Political danger was something I understood. This felt different, more immediate, more physical. We reached the colony's command center within minutes, moving through corridors filled with soldiers and staff responding to the alarm with practiced urgency. On the main display, I saw what had triggered the alert, a cluster of unregistered ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the colony's defensive perimeter, their configuration unmistakably Thessari in origin, though carrying none of the transponder codes required by treaty law for approaching vessels. "Ashbourne Circle," said the colony's senior human officer, a woman named Grace Whitfield, her voice tight but controlled. "Confirmed hostile approach vector. They're not slowing down." "How many?" Ethan asked. 6 vessels, Grace answered. "Small, fast, built for a strike rather than sustained combat. This isn't an invasion force. This is meant to look like an assassination attempt, something quick and deniable." I understood immediately what that meant. They intended to kill me, and likely Ethan alongside me, and disguise the strike well enough that responsibility could be shifted onto either side depending on which story served the Ashbourne Circle's purposes afterward. A dead treaty bride and a dead human officer would reignite the war faster than any political speech ever could. "Evacuate the residential sector," Ethan said, already moving toward the tactical display, studying the approach vectors with an intensity I hadn't seen in him before. "Get the diplomatic staff to the shelters. I want every available soldier positioned along the northern approach, here and here." He pointed to 2 locations on the display, and Grace nodded immediately, relaying the orders through her communicator without hesitation, the kind of trust that told me this was not the first time she had followed his instructions during a moment of genuine crisis. "What about you?" Grace asked. "I'll take the perimeter myself," Ethan said. "Along with anyone who wants to volunteer. Kayleigh stays with me." "Sir, with respect, that's—" "Not a discussion, Grace," he said, not unkindly, but with a finality that ended the conversation immediately. "Get everyone else to safety. I'll handle the approach." I stared at him, my mind racing through everything I knew about combat, about strategy, about the impossible odds of one man holding a perimeter against 6 armed vessels and whatever ground forces they carried. Even accounting for everything strange I had witnessed since our wedding day, this seemed like something beyond reasonable confidence. This seemed like something closer to recklessness. "Ethan," I said, grabbing his arm as he turned to leave the command center, "this is not one attacker with a knife. This is 6 warships. You cannot simply walk out there and expect to survive this." He turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression that was neither the careful calm he usually wore nor the focused urgency of the past few minutes. It was something quieter, more personal, an honesty he seemed to have been saving for exactly this moment. "I told you once that fragile people learn to stop being fragile, or they die," he said. "I wasn't only talking about humanity as a whole, Kalis. I was talking about myself, specifically. I've spent most of my adult life training for exactly this kind of moment, the kind where holding back stops being an option. I've held back through an entire war, because holding back kept the peace possible. I am not going to hold back today." "What does that mean?" I asked, though some part of me was beginning to suspect the answer already, piecing together everything I had observed since the wedding, the speed, the strength, the careful restraint that had colored every single interaction I'd witnessed between him and the rest of the world. "It means," he said, "that you're about to see something I've never shown anyone outside my own military, and something your people have never truly seen at all, not once in 50 years of war. I need you to trust me, completely, right now, More than you've trusted anyone in your entire life. Can you do that? Outside, through the reinforced viewport of the command center, I could see the first of the 6 ships beginning its descent toward the colony's outer perimeter, weapon systems visibly charging along its hull. Somewhere on those ships were people prepared to kill me, kill my husband, and unravel 50 years of hard-fought peace in a single violent morning. I thought of my sister's warning. I thought of the knife at my back on my wedding day. I thought of every careful, quiet moment since then that had slowly, unwillingly, taught me to trust the man standing in front of me, despite every instinct I had been raised with. "Yes," I said, "I trust you." Something shifted in his expression, a kind of quiet resolve settling over his features like a mask finally allowed to fall away. "Then stay behind me," he said, "and watch." He turned and walked toward the exit of the command center, moving with a purpose that no longer bothered to disguise itself as anything ordinary. And as the alarms continued to wail around us and the first ship began its final descent toward the colony grounds, I found myself following him not out of duty, not out of political obligation, but out of a genuine desire to finally see, after everything I had witnessed and everything I had begun to suspect, exactly what my husband truly was beneath the careful, unremarkable mask he had worn since the day we met. The first ship touched down at the northern edge of the colony grounds, its landing struts crushing the carefully maintained grass beneath it, and before its ramp had fully lowered, Ethan was already moving toward it, faster than I had ever seen him move before, faster even than the moment he had disarmed my attacker in the Grand Hall. I stayed close behind him, as he had instructed, watching as a squad of Thessari soldiers, their armor stripped of any official markings, poured down the ramp with weapons raised. These were not conscripts or hired mercenaries. I recognized the discipline in their movements, the precision of their formation. These were trained soldiers, likely former military, willing to commit treason against the Elder Council itself in service of the Ashbourne Circle's cause. They opened fire the moment they saw him. I do not know how to fully describe what happened next in a way that captures the reality of it, because even having witnessed it firsthand, some part of my mind still struggles to accept what I saw. Ethan moved between the incoming shots the way a leaf moves in a strong wind, not through impossible dodging exactly, but through a kind of precise economical motion that placed him exactly where the danger wasn't, over and over, faster than the soldiers could adjust their aim. He closed the distance to the first soldier in under 2 seconds and disarmed him with a single motion, taking the weapon and using it, without hesitation, to disable the man's armored suit at a vulnerable joint, rather than causing him lasting harm. I noticed that detail even in the chaos of the moment, the careful precision of it, disabling rather than destroying, incapacitating rather than killing. Whatever else Ethan Cole was capable of, he was choosing restraint even now, even facing armed soldiers sent to end his life and mine. The second and third soldiers fared no better. He moved through their formation like something that had already calculated every possible outcome of the engagement 3 steps ahead of when it happened, redirecting their weapons, disabling their armor, ending each confrontation in seconds rather than minutes. Within perhaps 30 seconds of the ship's landing, all 6 soldiers from the first vessel lay disarmed and immobilized on the ground, none of them permanently harmed, all of them very clearly no longer a threat. I heard the second ship's engines roar overhead as it adjusted its approach, likely responding to reports of the failed landing, and I saw Ethan's attention shift immediately toward it, his expression calculating trajectories and threats with a speed that reminded me, uncomfortably, of the tactical computers used by our own military command. "There will be more," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, without looking away from the approaching ship. "This is only the beginning of what they brought, but it's also only the beginning of what I'm willing to show them." The second ship attempted a different approach, coming in low and fast along the colony's eastern perimeter, likely hoping to catch us from an angle we weren't prepared to defend. Ethan was already moving before it fully landed, covering the distance between us and the new threat with a speed that defied everything I had believed possible for a human body. I followed as closely as I could, though I quickly realized I could barely keep pace with him, even at what I now understood was a deliberately restrained speed, chosen specifically so I would not be left too far behind in the chaos. Even holding back for my sake, he moved faster than any Thessari soldier I had ever witnessed in training or combat. The soldiers pouring from the second ship had clearly been warned about the first squad's failure, and they adjusted their tactics accordingly, spreading into a wider formation, attempting to surround him from multiple angles at once. I watched Ethan's expression shift slightly, a flicker of genuine focus replacing the calm control he had shown during the first engagement, and I understood, somehow, that this next confrontation would require more from him than the last. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration, though I do not believe that word fully captures what I witnessed. Ethan moved through the surrounding soldiers with an efficiency that felt almost mathematical, each motion calculated to disable rather than to harm, each engagement ending before the opposing soldier fully understood what had happened. He caught incoming strikes and redirected them. He disarmed weapons before they could be fired. He moved between multiple attackers simultaneously, somehow always positioned exactly where he needed to be to neutralize the next threat before it fully materialized. I found myself thinking, absurdly, of a phrase my grandmother had once used to describe true mastery of any skill. The idea that a master makes difficult things look effortless, not because the difficulty has vanished, but because their skill has grown large enough to absorb it completely. Watching Ethan move through soldiers meant to kill us both, I finally understood what she had meant. 4 more ships remained, and as their engines grew louder overhead, adjusting their approach in response to the failure of the first 2 landings, I saw something shift in Ethan's posture, a subtle change that told me the true test of this confrontation had not yet begun. "They're going to try something different now," he said, his voice still calm despite everything happening around us. "The first 2 waves were meant to test our defenses. Whoever is commanding this operation will know by now that conventional tactics aren't working." "What will they do instead?" I asked. "Something desperate," he said, "which usually means something more dangerous." He was right. The remaining 4 ships did not attempt individual landings this time. Instead, they converged on a single location near the colony's central plaza, disgorging their combined forces in a coordinated assault clearly designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers rather than clever tactics. I counted at least 30 soldiers pouring from the ships, far more than the previous 2 waves combined, all moving with the kind of urgent aggression that suggested their commanders understood this might be their final opportunity to complete the mission. For the first time since the attack began, I saw genuine concern flicker across Ethan's expression. Not fear exactly, but the serious focus of someone recalculating the difficulty of a problem in real time. "This is more than I expected them to commit," he admitted. "Which means someone is willing to lose everything to make sure this succeeds." "What do we do?" I asked. He turned to look at me, and something in his expression softened despite the chaos surrounding us. "You stay exactly where you are," he said, "behind that support column, out of the direct line of engagement. I need to end this quickly, before they have time to adapt further, and I can't do that while worrying about your safety at the same time." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I could help somehow, that I refused to simply hide while he faced 30 armed soldiers alone. But something in his voice told me this was not a moment for negotiation, and some deeper instinct told me that trusting him now mattered more than my own pride. "Be careful," I said, which felt like an absurdly small thing to say given everything I had witnessed him do already. He offered me the smallest of smiles, the same one I had seen at our wedding, and then he turned toward the approaching soldiers, and something in him changed in a way I still struggle to fully describe. He did not simply move faster this time. He moved with a kind of total commitment I had not seen from him before, every motion economical and precise, covering ground faster than my eyes could easily track, closing the distance to the largest cluster of soldiers before they had fully organized their formation. What followed was not a series of individual confrontations but something closer to a single, continuous motion. Ethan moving through the crowd of attackers the way wind moves through tall grass, disabling weapons, redirecting strikes, ending threats before they could fully form, over and over, faster than the soldiers could adjust to what was happening around them. I watched him take hits that should have staggered any ordinary person, absorbing blows meant for vital areas, and continuing forward without pause, his focus never wavering despite injuries that I could see even from my position behind the support column. I watched him lift a soldier twice his size and use the man's own momentum against him, ending the confrontation without a single unnecessary motion wasted. I watched him move between 3 attackers at once, somehow managing all 3 threats simultaneously, with a precision that felt less like combat and more like a carefully choreographed performance, one he had clearly practiced countless times before this exact moment arrived. It took him perhaps 4 minutes to end the confrontation entirely, 4 minutes that felt both impossibly fast and, given the sheer number of soldiers involved, remarkably measured and controlled. When it was finally over, 30 soldiers lay disarmed and incapacitated across the colony's central plaza, none of them killed, all of them very clearly finished fighting. Ethan stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing hard, blood visible along one arm where a strike had clearly landed, despite his best efforts to avoid it, and for a long moment, he simply stood there, surveying the aftermath with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he turned toward me, and whatever exhaustion or pain he might have been feeling seemed to fall away, replaced by immediate concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the distance between us in seconds. "I am unharmed," I said, though my voice trembled slightly, whether from fear or from the sheer disbelief of everything I had just witnessed, I couldn't quite say. "Ethan, what you just did isn't finished yet," he said, his attention already shifting toward the sky, where I could hear the distant hum of additional ships approaching, likely command vessels arriving to assess why their strike force had gone silent. "Reinforcements are coming. I need to know whether they're here to continue the attack, or whether Thessari Command has finally arrived to intervene." I looked up at the approaching ships myself, and something in their configuration seemed different from the earlier attackers, more organized, carrying markings I recognized from my own government's official military, rather than the deliberately anonymous vessels the Ashbourne Circle had sent first. "Those are Dominion command ships," I said slowly, relief flooding through me as I recognized the formation. "My people. They must have detected the unauthorized attack and responded." Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he remained alert, watching the approaching ships with the same careful focus he had shown throughout the entire engagement. "Then it seems," he said quietly, "that this particular fight is finally over." I looked around at the wreckage of the colony's central plaza, at the disabled soldiers scattered across the ground, at the wounded man standing beside me who had, within the span of less than an hour, revealed a version of himself that 50 years of war had never fully shown my people, and I understood, with a clarity that settled deep into my bones, that nothing about how I viewed humanity, or my own husband, would ever be the same again. The Dominion command ships landed within minutes, and Thessari soldiers poured out to secure the colony grounds, moving with the brisk efficiency of professionals responding to a confirmed act of treason against the Elder Council itself. I recognized the commanding officer immediately, a stern veteran named Colonel Draven Kessick, a man who had served 3 elders and had personally overseen the negotiations that led to the treaty in the first place. He surveyed the wreckage of the plaza with an expression I could not quite read, taking in the disabled soldiers, the damaged ships, and finally, the human standing beside me with blood still visible along his arm. "Report," Kessick said, his tone clipped and formal, though I could see genuine surprise beneath the professional exterior as he took in the scale of what had clearly occurred. Ethan gave a concise, measured account of the attack, from the initial alarm through each wave of the assault, careful to emphasize that every soldier involved had been disabled rather than killed, a detail I noticed Kessick's expression register with something approaching respect. 36 soldiers, Kessick said finally, his eyes moving across the plaza. 6 ships, all neutralized, and not a single fatality among them, despite what they clearly intended for both of you. I saw no reason for further bloodshed once the threat was contained, Ethan said simply. They were soldiers, following orders from people who abused their loyalty. That's a different kind of guilt than the ones who gave those orders in the first place. Keswick studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, a recalculation that I recognized because I had gone through the same process myself over the past several hours. 50 years, Keswick said quietly, almost to himself. 50 years, we fought your people, certain we understood exactly what we were facing. I begin to wonder now how much of that war was fought against an image of your species rather than the reality of it. Some wars are fought against misunderstandings as much as against actual enemies, Ethan said. I hope this one doesn't need to be repeated because of another one. Keswick nodded slowly, then turned his attention to organizing the arrest of the surviving Ashbourne Circle soldiers and the recovery operation for the damaged vessels, leaving Ethan and me standing together amid the aftermath of a battle that I suspected would be discussed in both our governments for years to come. It took nearly 3 days for the full scope of the Ashbourne Circle's plot to be uncovered, a process that involved interrogations, recovered communications, and careful cooperation between Dominion investigators and human intelligence officers who arrived shortly after Colonel Keswick's forces secured the colony. What emerged was a conspiracy far larger than either side had initially suspected, involving several officials within the Elder Council itself, individuals who had quietly funded and organized the Ashbourne Circle's operations while publicly supporting the treaty in official proceedings. My sister Elira, to my relief, was cleared of any direct involvement in the plot itself, though her sympathy toward the Ashbourne Circle's grievances, if not their methods, became a matter of quiet family tension that would take considerably longer to heal than the treaty's political wounds. I found myself, in the days following the attack, spending long hours speaking with her, trying to help her understand what I had witnessed, what it meant, and why I no longer believed the narrative she and so many others had been raised to accept about humanity's supposed weakness. "You truly believe this changes things," she said to me during one such conversation, her tone still carrying traces of the skepticism I had once shared myself. "I believe it should," I said. 50 years of war, and we never understood what we were actually fighting. Doesn't that concern you, sister? Not the fact that they're stronger than we believed, but the fact that we were so certain of our own assumptions that we never questioned them, even after 50 years of evidence suggesting otherwise. Elira did not have an easy answer for that question, and I did not expect one. Some assumptions, I was learning, take longer to unravel than others, especially when an entire culture has built its understanding of the galaxy around them. Ethan, for his part, remained remarkably unchanged in the days following the attack, at least in how he treated those around him. He spent long hours assisting with the wounded, both human and Thessari, tending to injuries with the same careful, quiet competence he brought to everything else, never once mentioning what he had done during the battle unless directly asked, and even then, offering only brief, modest accounts of events I had witnessed firsthand as something closer to extraordinary. I finally asked him, during a quiet evening about a week after the attack, why humanity had chosen to hide so much of what they were truly capable of, even during 50 years of war that might have ended sooner had my people fully understood what they were facing. "Because most of the galaxy only knows how to respond to strength with fear," he said, sitting across from me in our quarters, the same quiet space where this entire journey between us had first begun to change. "Show a new species your full capability too early, and you don't get respect, Kalis. You get panic. You get preemptive strikes born from terror rather than genuine hostility. We learned that lesson a long time ago, long before we ever encountered your people, from mistakes made even among our own history. So we hold back. We let new neighbors in the galaxy get to know us slowly, let them build trust before we ever reveal what we're truly capable of. It's not deception exactly, it's patience. We wanted a chance at peace first, before anything else." "And now," I asked, "now that my people have seen what you're truly capable of, at least in part, what happens next?" He considered the question carefully before answering. "Now I hope we build something better than 50 years of misunderstanding," he said. "A peace based on genuine respect rather than assumed weakness on either side. I think your people are capable of that, Kalis. I've seen enough of you, and enough of your sister, and enough of Colonel Keswick's reaction after the battle, to believe that." I found myself, in that quiet moment, thinking back to the wedding day that had begun this entire journey, the knife against my back, the fall of a man I had assumed my husband could never stop in time, and the slow, careful unraveling of everything I thought I understood about the species I had been raised to see as fundamentally weaker than my own. "I did not marry you because I wanted to," I said quietly. "I want you to know that I understand that has not changed, but I find myself glad, now, that it was you specifically the council chose for this arrangement, rather than someone else." Ethan reached across the small distance between us and took my hand gently, the same careful gesture he had shown from the very first day we met, a gentleness that I now understood was a choice rather than a limitation, a deliberate restraint, chosen by someone who could have shown far less patience and far less care, had he wished to. "I'm glad too," he said simply. In the weeks that followed, the treaty between our peoples grew stronger rather than weaker, the attack having accomplished the opposite of what the Ashbourne Circle had intended. Rather than shattering the fragile peace between humanity and the Thessari Dominion, the failed assault became proof, undeniable and witnessed by officials from both sides, that the treaty was worth protecting, that the alternative to peace was a war neither side truly understood the full cost of fighting. Colonel Keswick returned to Dominion space with a report that would eventually reach the Elder Council itself, a careful, detailed account of exactly what had occurred at the treaty colony, an account that included, prominently, the restraint Ethan had shown throughout the entire engagement, choosing to disable, rather than kill, even soldiers actively trying to end his life. I later learned that this single detail did more to shift opinion within the Elder Council than any diplomatic argument could have managed on its own. The recognition that a species capable of such overwhelming strength had chosen, deliberately and consistently, not to use it to its fullest, brutal extent. I stood beside Ethan several weeks later, at a formal ceremony held to commemorate the treaty's continued survival, watching representatives from both our governments speak of a future built on genuine cooperation rather than uneasy tolerance. I thought back to the wedding day that had started all of this, the sacrifice I had believed myself to be making, the weakness I had assumed I would find in the man standing beside me. I had been wrong about so much, I realized, standing there in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened. I had been wrong about humanity's supposed fragility. I had been wrong about the nature of the marriage I had entered, expecting only duty and endurance. And I had been wrong, most importantly, about what genuine strength actually looked like, having spent my entire life believing it meant showing power openly and often, only to learn from Ethan Cole that true strength sometimes looks like quiet restraint, like patience, like a gentleness, chosen deliberately by someone who never needed to prove what they were capable of to anyone at all. The treaty that had begun as a desperate political arrangement between two exhausted governments had become, against every expectation I carried into that first meeting, something genuinely worth protecting. And the marriage I had entered believing it would be my burden to endure had become, in the months since, something I found myself grateful for in ways I could never have predicted on the day a knife was first pressed against my back. Watching the two fleets stand together at the ceremony, neither side raising weapons, neither side flinching from the other's presence, I understood finally what Ethan had meant, weeks earlier, when he told me that humanity had only ever shown my people a fraction of what they were truly capable of. The treaty had not ended the war by giving the Thessari Dominion a hostage to hold over humanity's ambitions. It had ended the war, in the end, by giving humanity a reason to finally stop holding back entirely, to reveal, when it mattered most, exactly what they had been capable of the entire time, and in doing so, to earn something far more valuable than victory ever could have provided. They had earned, at long last, genuine respect. and standing beside my husband as the ceremony concluded, watching two peoples who had spent 50 years as enemies finally begin to understand one another, I found myself thinking that perhaps the marriage the Elder Council had arranged out of desperation had accomplished something far greater than either government had originally intended. It had not simply ended a war. It had built, quietly and carefully, the foundation of something that might finally last.